if you find yourself with a camera in your hand and you want to learn how to use it, please subscribe to this channel, like the videos, comment down below what you would like to learn more about. Hi Photos photographers. Today we're talking about how to achieve a better color photograph. I know I keep talking about it and hyping it. Maybe a nickname for me would be the ISO guy. No, not really. So really what we're talking about when we want a better color photograph is we want better vibrance to the colors, right? So there needs to be a proper amount of lighting, there needs to be a good contrast, and there needs to be a fast enough shutter, but the shutter needs to be open enough time to allow the light to reflect off of those colored items. So yes, all three need to be set properly, and that's going to change by how much light is in your camera scene. In other words, what your camera sees is your camera scene. And no, I'm not saying S-E-E-N, I'm saying S-C-E-N-E. So in other words, the scene that your camera will capture and will show as your subject, or the context, the expression of the 1,000 words you want to convey to your viewer is the scene of your camera. So achieving a better color photograph, allow your camera to have enough time to see your scene properly. That would be shutter speed. Allow your scene to be dialed in enough, whether that's a greater depth of focus or a more shallow depth of focus, and being your aperture, your f-stop number. But really what you want in best vibrance of photograph, so that your colors shine through in richer colors, greater detail. Number one, you're going to need rich colors. Number two, you're going to need to set your ISO somewhere fairly low so that your density is a word, or the dark parts, what is the vibrance, the depth of those colors really comes out. I'm not saying the colors need to be shaded, but they need to be lit well enough, but they need to be vibrant enough to give that rich color. Does that make sense? We'll get into these topics a little bit more in depth later on, but there are two different ways to achieve a color. Did you know that? The primary way that we use in photography to achieve a color is by light, because the sunlight, and we talked a little bit about this in white balance, custom white balance versus Kelvin, but the sunlight is bright white because it has all of the colors of the color spectrum evenly brought together. Now, as the light of the sun refracts through our environment and past clouds, we'll see different colors come out. We'll see the brilliant blues in the dark evening or the early morning. We'll see the awesome yellows after the bright red morning sky, or the awesome golden and orange reddish sunsets. Those are especially on the coasts, right? California coast, Oregon and Washington, y'all have some really awesome sunsets, especially looking out over the water from a mountaintop. It's gorgeous. But the sunrises on the East Coast are some awesome sunrises too, right? You get the sunrise over the water of the ocean, or if you're somewhere up in the Smoky Mountain area, you get to see that beautiful sunrise coming up over the mountains with a foggy haze across the ground. Anyway, there's some great photographs to be taken, okay? Landscape, sunset, sunrises. But the better color photograph is going to be, shall we say, making your sensor less sensitive to light and your shutter speed moderate enough to stop any motion you may want of moving or passing clouds, but also setting your aperture tight enough, f-stop 22 or something like that, similarly enough to be able to get as great of a hyperfocal distance depth of field as possible. But so I guess I'm talking a little bit technically, as if I consider y'all professionals. Okay, so I have a very great opinion of you, but let me see. I really hesitate giving you settings. Have you noticed that? Because I don't want you shooting in my style. If y'all share anything with me in the comments, I want to see your style, not mine. So, but to achieve this idea, you have more than enough flexibility to be able to create this look and feel on your own. But so the f-stop number, let's start with the f-stop, the aperture of your lens diaphragm. To achieve the optimal hyperfocal distance at a distance of a scene, like from wherever you are to a mountaintop, that's going to be, unless you're looking directly up the mountain, right? But that's still going to be at least 1,000 foot, roughly. And I'm speaking of a mountain, not just a hill. But the 1,000 foot would be a third of a mile, something like that, because it's 3,000 something feet to a mile. So that aperture is going to have to be at least 18 to really not blur the edge of your landscape scene. So that would be f18 for your aperture. Let's say set your ISO to 160, I would say, at the highest. I guess you could push that as high as 320, but I think you're really going to notice at that point, if you contrast what your camera gets at 160 ISO to 320 ISO, I really think you're going to notice the blacks just aren't as rich. The depth of that shadow is not as intriguing, but perhaps you don't want as, quote, moody of a shot, so you prefer a little bit more visibility in that shadow, and that's perfectly fine. That's your shooting style, right? So you could push that 160 to 320, or perhaps 400. My hesitation in letting that carry too far from 125, 160, to give you an illustration of why I'm thinking this way, is the more density you remove from the shadowed dark areas of your photograph and brighten your highlights, the less contrast you have, the more flattened your image is. You remember when we were talking about a low contrast photograph, and the thumbnail we used for that video was a bunch of green leaves, and there wasn't a whole lot of variation to it. You saw the outline of the leaves, there was some good separation, but the contrast just wasn't there. I would venture to say a majority of you probably didn't think that much of the thumbnail. It just wasn't that interesting because of the contrast wasn't there. So that's why I suggest keeping your ISO low, something below 400 definitely. 320 or less is almost a must, but doing my level best to shoot the way that my personality I prefer is definitely 160 or less. I noticed when I was shooting in studio product photography that if I wanted to reduce a shadow on a product, that I didn't even really adjust my shutter speed or the aperture, I adjusted the ISO, and it was a very soft move, and it wasn't necessarily noticeable to somebody without a trained eye. But I noticed that that shadow was definitely softened, And yes, it may have taken away from some of the vibrance of the colors of the product, but with shooting in the studio so much, I knew who was doing the editing of these photographs, and so I would send him a quick shot via email and say, hey, just a heads up, I shot this with a little bit of different than I usually do for camera settings, and so if you need to add a little contrast, it wouldn't hurt and doesn't hurt my feelings at all. Just giving you a heads up, I was softening a shadow here or whatever, just giving them a heads up so that when they're doing their post-processing script work, they can then turn the image around to be the best representation of the product for the customer that was doing any bidding on it, so or shopping for it. So, and depending on where you do your product shooting, whether it's an auction house or a sales retail shop, you know, that's all part of it. But it's knowing your camera's operation so that you can explain what you shot, how you shot to somebody else if they're doing the editing for you is really part of it. And that's really and truly, in film photography, that's what you would do to the lab. Do for the lab, not do to the lab. But that's what you would do for the lab, is when you send your film in, you let them know, hey, I shot this ISO film at such and such a shutter speed, because they're not going to know that, right? They would know that now with the EXIF metadata on digital photographs, but they didn't know that when you were sending in film. They didn't even know the aperture of your lens when you shot it. They just know, wow, this looks more exposed through the film and viewing the film than the others. But let them know that, you know, frame number such and such, I shot with a faster shutter speed, so go ahead and let it sit in the exposure chemical for another stop. That gives them an understanding, and they would have a specific timeline that certain things would be exposed in the post-processing side after being shot. So really and truly, when we're talking digital photography and we're talking about editing afterwards, if you do your own editing, this is important and very helpful to understand how digital photography really has innovated from film photography, so that you know more about how to achieve a style that you're looking for. If you want it to look more like film photography from the day, or if you're looking to get into film photography, know that each frame of the film you shoot has a higher value by the price of film than an actuation of your digital camera sensor. So maybe we'll get into talking about film sometime soon. There's some interesting things I've been studying into the innovation of digital photography that I think is interesting and I'd like to share with y'all. But film photography is its own art, and it's really a lot of fun. So thank y'all so much for watching. If you're not a subscriber, we would love to have your subscription. If you are a subscriber, or you just, this video is something that came up in your general suggestion through YouTube and you found some value in its content, please leave us a comment and let us know what it helped you figure out and learn, or go study up more on to learn more about. We thank you so much for your watching this, and again, if you're not a subscriber, we would love your subscription. Thank you so much. God bless.